Hello one and all, and welcome to Behind the Glass, the podcast which aims to take you behind the scenes of the YouTube channel Seen Through Glass, as well as the automotive and social media worlds. I am your host, Sam, from that YouTube channel Seen Through Glass. Welcome to an episode I've been meaning to record for, well, pretty much the entire year. It is finally my F1 2020 special. I had sort of spoken about the fact that I was planning to do these almost after every single race, but just because of the way of the world, I really haven't had time to do that, and we've been doing other exciting things here on Behind the Glass. This is really the first chance I've had to kind of sit down and reflect on the season so far, which has been, I think, a very interesting season, not necessarily for the right reasons. Fans of Tony, apologies, he is not here today. To cut a really long story short, those of you that have been watching my main channel adventures will know that I went on a road trip with a stunning Lotus Evora GT410 Sport, which I've been lent by Lotus Cars for a few months. But unfortunately, because of all the sort of COVID mayhem and chaos, I had to kind of cut that trip short, and I raced back to the UK. More on that to come soon on the main channel. But it's meant that I'm here sooner than I expected to be, and I haven't sort of got a time to record with Tony until later in the week, at which point we'll be doing one of our regular episode. So yes, today it's just me nerding out on F1. So if you're not really into F1, or you find me boring and you only listen to these podcasts for Tony, which I realize is quite a lot of you, feel free to skip this episode. I won't be offended. But if you are going to tune in, hello and welcome. Those of you watching on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. Those of you listening, thank you for choosing to listen to me only and not having to view my rather sweaty face today. It's a little bit clammy and muggy here in the studio, so yeah, I'm not looking my best, but I am actually wearing what you're missing out on if you're listening. I am wearing my Sky Sports F1 merch or swag. I got this when I did a sort of bit of promotional activity with Sky Sports themselves. They gave me this very nice one. It's got my surname on the back, and anyway, I'm getting carried away. And finally, what up to the patrons, you amazing group of people who support this podcast in such an amazing way, and there are some huge things happening for Behind the Glass and Seen Through Glass in like September and October, largely thanks to the patrons. So you guys are legends, and I hope later this week when we record, I guess it will be next week's episode with Tony, a patron's going to be joining us for a section of the podcast. That'll be cool. Anyway, enough sort of preamble, enough sell on this channel. Let's get into it, because oh my God, is there a lot to discuss? I'm actually even going to take my glasses off for a second. That's how serious things are getting. So just in case you're not a big F1 fan, or you haven't really been keeping track of the season so far because you didn't really realize it had started, or you've just been busy focusing on your own life, because let's face it, all of our lives were turned upside down by COVID. Yes, Formula One is back, but behind closed doors, with a season full of uncertainty. How many races are we going to have? Who's going to be champion? Are all the races going to count? Will Sebastian Vettel still be driving at the end of the year? Lots to discuss, but fundamentally, Formula One have said that they're going to try and ram in as many races as possible to try and make it as full a season as possible. I think at the moment we're scheduled up to somewhere sort of October, November time. What's quite exciting is it's sort of mainly a European season. We're actually seeing the return of some pretty iconic and amazing racetracks, which, again, something I want to come back to. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to see some amazing races, but for those of us who, you know, well, enjoy a bit of nostalgia, F1 nostalgia, or F1 history, it's quite exciting. But also still rumours of places like, you know, Turkey coming back, and they're just trying to stretch that season for as long as possible. So yes, let's wait and see. But for now, I think at time of recording, we are 6 races in. Now I'm going to try, maybe I need to put my glasses back on. No, let's say we're 6 races in. So some decent stuff to talk about. And kind of what I want to do, I guess, is almost go through team by team and driver by driver, rather than sort of nailing into the specifics of the races. I think we'll just review on what everyone's been doing so far and my general thoughts. The first thing I kind of want to come out and say is that I think so far it's been a pretty dull season. Or, I mean, I am a huge F1 fan, don't get me wrong, so even if I call it boring, doesn't mean I'm going to switch off. And there'll be lots of you, if you're not into F1, being like, F1's always been boring, go watch MotoGP. I get it, MotoGP is insanely exciting. But if you're an F1 fan, you're an F1 fan, and you put up with the boring time. It's a bit like footballers, or football fans even. They watch nil-nil games, really boring nil-nil games all the time, and just go, oh yeah, but I still love football. So, you know, an F1 race can be boring, doesn't mean I don't like F1. But as a season as a whole, I would say it's dull because in my mind, it's the most dominant Mercedes have been since 2014. I feel like their advantage over the rest of the field is so significant that actually for the first time in a long time, I don't watch qualifying anymore because I know it's going to be Hamilton or Bottas. It just doesn't interest me. Yes, of course, the rest of the grid is exciting, but as we've seen in the races, actually that midfield action is so close. There's a lot of overtaking, a lot of moves, so qualifying isn't that important. So yeah, I skip quali because I just know it's Mercedes, Hamilton or Bottas, and really I feel like Bottas is going to get the pole. Well, let's not get into Bottas just yet. I'll save that. We've got a whole Bottas section coming. But yeah, so that I have found a bit boring. I wouldn't say the lack of fans has made it dull, but there's definitely some weird element. For example, pre-race build-up. I don't watch any of the pre-race build-up anymore either because without the atmosphere, it's a bit dull. The format of it, the grid, all of that stuff is a bit like, meh. It's all just a bit sort of lacking in, well, excitement or atmosphere. So instead, I just kind of tune in 10 minutes before the race starts. So all in all, I would say out of the 6 races, two have been very exciting. Maybe 2.5 because of the last few laps at the British Grand Prix. Again, something we'll come back to, I'm sure. So yeah, all in all, so far, pretty dull. But lots to talk about, interestingly. So let's do what I planned, which is to sort of, rattle through drivers. And at this point, I'm going to have to put my glasses back on because I need to be able to look at my computer screen. I've got the results so far of each driver. I'm going to be doing this by the current championship standings. So not quite team by team, driver by driver. And I would say somewhat unsurprisingly, in last place currently, based on his results, Romain Grosjean. Gross Jeans, I call him. In my household, he's known as Gross Jeans. This guy. I mean, there was a moment, wasn't there? Someone reminded me, there was a moment when Romain Grosjean was an exciting new talent and he was very fast in qualifying. Then he kept crashing and then he had that mental breakdown and went to see a therapist. And I think Haas are in big trouble. I think this is probably the last year we're going to see Haas on the grid. I really hope that team keeps going in some shape or form, but I kind of doubt it because of the way it was put together, because of the funding, and because of the fact there are many other teams on the grid that need financial support right now. I don't think Haas seems like that attractive a proposition unless Günther Steiner somehow pieces together a load of random investors and off they go. But yeah, Haas, big question mark. They're struggling in the races. Grosjean retired in Austria the first race in the 13th, 16th, 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 19th. That is pretty dark. So yeah, no big news for him, and Roman himself seeming a little unimpressive, I would have to say. 20th place? Why did I say 20th place? George Russell. Oh my God, why can I not speak? I've just literally put on all the syllables there. George Russell in 20th behind Nicholas Latifi, which I think would come as a surprise because Russell has been very impressive this year and everyone's been talking about how impressive he's been. However, Latifi got that 11th place. Oh my God, people, I have developed a lisp. This is really worrying. 11th place in Austria, and Russell's highest finishing position has been 12th. Even though he's been qualifying very strongly. So yeah, Latifi's actually above him in the championship order. But yeah, George Russell, let's sort of talk about him for a second because I think it does feel like he's having a very strong year. And obviously last year he had a disaster with that Williams. And Williams still right at the back of the grid, but they are at least able to compete with other back markers. They're not now literally 2 or 3 seconds off the pace. They're able to mix with the Hasses and the Alfa Romeos and some of the Alfa Tauris, brackets Toro Rossos. Which is good to see, and George Russell, I think, making a big name for himself. Obviously, we now know Bottas confirmed for 2021, so Russell's got to wait a little bit longer for that Mercedes seat. I would assume that Mercedes seat is his at some point, and I think he'll sit at Williams until it's ready for him. That's my kind of assumption. If you haven't listened to the F1 Beyond the Grid podcast with George Russell, it's super interesting. I'd always written him off as a bit of a Jolyon Palmer. No offense, Jolyon Palmer. That was offensive, but I just, no offense gets me out of it, doesn't it? In the sense that I'm sure he's very good, sure he's very quick, but didn't seem to have the personality, the charisma, the persona to push him forward, to elevate him into the sort of mainstream. But George Russell, oh my God. I'm going to have a sip of my very nice Nocco. If you don't know about Nocco, by the way, these guys are amazing. Has a bit of caffeine, maybe that will help out with my speaking. But yes, George Russell, Thank you. There we go. It's worked a treat. Yeah. What was I saying? I actually can't remember. But he's making a name for himself. And in that podcast, he comes across very well, quite funny, got a bit of persona. And everyone I speak to within the sport or out of the sport says that this guy is super, super quick. And he should be thought of in the same breath as Leclerc, Norris, arguably sometimes Verstappen, definitely Albon. You know, that whole lot, he is right up there, if not the quickest of the bunch. So let's wait and see. But moving on, because we're going to rattle through this. Nicholas Latifi, as I say, above him. You know, bravo, because I actually think slightly unimpressive season so far by Latifi. Tricky. Hard to be a rookie in a car that's not that competitive. If you don't know, I think the Latifis are McLaren investors. Have I got that right? Or Mercedes? No, I think McLaren investors. So, big money family. I think he's going to be around for a while. And I hope that he kind of, you know, pulls itself together. Because I think it's cool to have a Canadian in the sport. He seems like a nice guy. But so far, results 11th, 17th, 19th, 15th, 19th, 18th. And I don't know. As I say, maybe it's tough to make a name for yourself in a really uncompetitive car, but we have to look at it face value. At the moment, he's above Russell in the championship standings. Okay, fine. No points for either, but it's not always what counts. Moving on, slightly upsettingly, in 18th, Kimi Raikkonen. Now, Alfa Romeo having a really tough year here, and we have to assume that's because of their ties with Ferrari, and we're obviously going to come on to the fact that Ferrari are having the year to forget, or maybe we're going to have a few years to forget, ahead, and a large part of it to do with the engine, well, regulations or restrictions that were applied to them at the end of last year. And I think Alfa Romeo are really suffering because of that. And they're looking super uncompetitive. They keep having issues. They're slow. And Kimi, no points on the board yet. Results are retirement, 11th, 15th, 17th, 15th, 14th. And he looks fed up. He doesn't look like he's having a good time. A lot of moaning, complaining on the radio. However, now my patrons will know about this, but last week, whilst I was on the road, I got the completely random opportunity to jump on a Zoom very quickly with Raikkonen and Giovinazzi. It came out of nowhere. I got a call from Alfa Romeo, the automotive side, saying, look, we've kind of got this random opportunity. Would you like to have a go? And I said, well, I just want to have a chat with them. Turned out to be the most awkward 25 minutes of my life because clearly it was the end of the sort of press day. I think it was the British Grand Prix or the 70th Grand Prix. Anyway, one of the Silverstone races. Kimi and Giovinazzi looked a bit tired. The connection was really bad, so I had to keep repeating myself. It's just really uncomfortable and awkward. But the point of this was, Kimi was quite chatty. Of the two, Kimi was chatting a lot. I'm going to play out now a couple of just excerpts, because we talked about the fact that some cool races were coming back and what it's like racing in 2020. But the whole thing was just so cringeworthy and toe-curling that I'm not going to play much of it. Huge thanks to Alfa Romeo for allowing me or giving me the opportunity, and I enjoyed parts of it, but in general, not that playable. Anyway, so here's a few words from Kimi about how he's finding this season so far, and then we'll come back to keep running our way through the order. Kimi, you're probably the only driver on the grid that raced at Imola before, huh? In an F1 car.
Yeah, somebody said that. I'm surprised if they never raced in other categories there.
I raced from Russia.
Yeah, so I think on F1 car. So, yeah. Nürburgring is Imola. I think I always enjoyed those tracks. I think they're good tracks, so it's nice to get them back. And then the Portimao, I've never been there, so I'm not how it is, but I've seen some footage of it. I think they did super bikes or something on there.
Yeah.
So, they did some F1 testing somewhere mid-2000s or somewhere there, but I never went there.
So, after Raikkonen, or ahead of Raikkonen, we've got the other Haas, Kevin Magnussen, who has managed to get a point on the board, a 10th place at the Hungarian Grand Prix, meaning he is, the first of the point scorers. But apart from that, his results, a retirement in Austria, 12th, then the 10th, a retirement, 15th. So, yeah, as I mentioned, Haas, not having the best time of it. If they do stick around, or if that team sticks around, I don't imagine Magnussen and Grosjean will be the drivers. I think they need an all-new lineup. Oh, it's just all a bit painful. Moving on, Danil Kvyat in 16th, AlphaTauri. Now, how are we feeling about AlphaTauri? Obviously, Toro Rosso have had some strong seasons last few years. Pierre Gasly having that amazing podium at the end of last year, and Danil Kvyat also getting a podium last year. sort of a hit and miss year this year. So Danil Kvyat's done a 12th, a 10th, a 12th, retirement, a 10th, a 12th. So they're really hovering around at the sort of end of the midfield, or basically just outside the points. They seem to be kind of poking their head around. They seem to be there or thereabouts. And I still think they're in the position to maybe to steal or to nab a good, decent points finish at some point. Maybe not a podium this year, but they're always kind of there. So sort of seems weird to be saying that Danil Kvyat down in 16th. He has got 2 points. Obviously still early in the year. But yeah, they're just kind of there. I don't think it's going to be a stellar AlphaTauri year. But they're just solid midfield positioning. Just above him, Antonio Giovinazzi. Obviously, we've done the whole Alfa Romeo thing. I think Giovinazzi's having a strong year. Is he a potential Ferrari driver? I personally don't see it. Obviously, Sainz has got the drive for next year. Giovinazzi at the moment isn't blowing me away. I think he's doing a good job at Alfa Romeo. But Callum Ilott, who's coming up in Formula 2, who's also a Ferrari reserve driver, I think making a bit more noise than Giovinazzi's being able to do in F1, if that makes sense. So again, he's struggling with a tough car to drive, so we have to have some sympathy. But yeah, let's wait and see what happens with old Antonio. Now, interestingly, in 14th place in the championship, Nico Hulkenberg, because of that 7th place at the second British Grand Prix, the 70th anniversary race, gave him 6 points on the board and 14th place in the Drivers' Championship. I mean, what a story that was, right? I don't think it's necessarily the last we're going to see of Hulkenberg this year. I definitely don't think it's going to be the last driver swap we see. I do think drivers will be a little bit more careful now. We obviously know that Sergio Perez, Checo Perez, went back to Mexico after the Hungarian Grand Prix, I think to see his mother, who just come out of hospital, not COVID related, but he went back to see her, followed all the precautions he should, was very, very careful, but somehow managed to catch COVID, which kind of does identify or indicate how invisible this disease or this virus is, and how easy it is to catch and be kind of asymptomatic and not realize you're carrying it around. So he tested positive, wasn't allowed to enter the paddock. Last minute call for Nico Hulkenberg, an amazing story. Jumped in the car, was pretty quick, at least on sort of 1 lap pace, right out of the box. Didn't get to race at the first British Grand Prix, but obviously did get to race in the 70th anniversary, and showed, I guess, a little bit of rust when it came to racecraft, especially off the line. But let's not forget, he qualified P3. I mean, what a nutter. Now, does this suggest that Hulkenberg is just forever the dark horse, or the sort of missed opportunity guy? Anyway, basically, is Hulkenberg that good, or is F1 just a tiny bit too easy for a good driver to get up to speed in? Because we saw over on a 1 lap pace basis, as long as you can drive, maybe you can extract quite a lot out of these cars quite quickly. But to string it all together over a race distance, to manage tyres, manage strategy, all these different hybrid systems, maybe that's the tough job for an F1 driver these days. I don't know. I sort of read it weirdly. I loved the story, and it was sort of comeback hero, and it really put Hulkenberg on the map. And there's a chance that we might see him in a Ferrari before the end of the year, but let's come back to that. Yeah, I can't decide how I feel about it. There's a part of me that wants to celebrate it and go, Nico Hulkenberg, you're just the best thing ever. And then there's another part of me that goes, I kind of didn't want him to be that quick. But it is also testament to what a good job Racing Point have done this year, and maybe what a not great job Stroll and Perez are doing. Let's come back. Moving on, Pierre Gasly. I say we've touched on AlphaTauri. He's having a good year, Pierre Gasly, isn't he? A bit like Danil Kvyat. Going back to Toro Rosso, I feel like he's just becoming a better, more consistent driver. It felt like he maybe got that Red Bull drive a little bit too soon, too much pressure, too much criticism. He needed time to evolve. And now he's done that, so he's doing that. He's really just performing well. Some of his racecraft, I think, is amazing. Some of his overtakes, and his results speak for it. There he is, 13th in the championship, a 7th, 15th retirement, 7th, 11th, 9th, 14 points on the board. I think solid back end of the midfield, or back end of the points, but doing well and punching a little bit above his weight, and definitely above his more experienced teammate in Danil Kvyat. 12th, Esteban Ocon. Now, Renault. What are we thinking about Renault this year? And what are we thinking about Daniel Ricciardo? We've got a few more paces to go before we get to Ricciardo on the championship list. But Esteban Ocon, A lot was made of Ocon when he was leaving the sport. Oh, this guy has to stay in. He's too good to go. Oh, what a shame. If Ocon doesn't end up on the grid, this is what's wrong with Formula One. Okay, he's had a year out, a year and a bit out. Maybe he needs a bit more time. I think Danny Rick's definitely got the handle of him at the moment. And I don't know. I was never necessarily on the massive Ocon train. I think he's obviously very talented, and some of the signs we saw of his era at Force India were impressive, but not like mind-blowing. I don't think of Ocon in the same breath as I do Leclerc, Verstappen, now, I guess, Norris, Sainz, Russell, etc. I don't see him in that breath, but maybe I'm complacent, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I should. But he's doing a pretty solid job, and I imagine Renault are pretty happy with him. And he is hot on the tails of Ricciardo, let's face it. In quali, they're pretty close, and they're only a few points apart in the championship. Wedged in between them, though, Sebastian Vettel. Oh, my God, what a story. I mean, what do we all think about Seb Vettel? So, announced basically before the year began, didn't it? And we've spoken about it quite a lot on this podcast. Vettel out of a job at the moment at the end of the year. Ferrari didn't even offer him a contract, gave him the boot, and boy, oh boy, has that relationship turned sour. I mean, it's just gone from bad to worse at every single race. It seems like communication has just completely broken down. There's almost an air of hatred. Like some of the radio communications, it just sounds like they just are miserable with each other, if they're talking at all. Because there's moments where Seb's just not replying to any radio messages, which is nuts. But for me, you could say it reminds me a little bit of his first year, his year with Danny Ricciardo at Red Bull, or maybe last year with Leclerc. But this is a whole nother side of a sort of Vettel unraveling. And I think as amazing and as talented as he is, and I'm massively in awe of Vettel. I've never been a Vettel fan, but I'm in awe of his abilities. He's never handled pressure well. When he was at Red Bull, he would always need to lead from the front, you know, and build that big gap. And then he was dominant, you know, quick in qualifying and then dominant in the race. If he was lower down or having to come through the field, he couldn't always do it. And let's not forget that amazing, was it 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix, when he did eventually fight his way back, but he fluffed it in the first couple of corners and nearly binned himself out of the race and out of the championship. So he doesn't seem to handle that kind of pressure that well. And this year, the mistakes he's making, that spin in the first corner at, was it the British or the 70th anniversary, one of the Silverstone races? I mean, you don't see rookies doing that. And I know he's had a lot of complaints about the chassis of his car and the fact that Ferrari really messed up with this year's car. But there's something more going on. There's something in his head that's not right. Now, are we going to see him on the grid next year? Now, obviously, I think there's been a lot of speculation about the fact that he might be going to Racing Point / Aston Martin, because Racing Point are going to be rebranded as Aston Martin next year. And I think Stroll would be willing to pay through the roof to get Vettel, because what a great PR story. However, if you were Stroll right now, and I'm talking about senior Stroll, Lawrence, would you be that desperate for Vettel to come on board? I think I'd be looking and be like, oh, maybe we don't want to pay this guy 25 mil a year. Like, he doesn't seem to really have his head in the game. And if I was Vettel, I'd be thinking, oh, do I really want to carry on with all this, all the scrutiny and the pressure, and it's all just so annoying. And Vettel's spoken out quite a lot in recent years that he's not the biggest fan of the direction Formula One is going in. And I think he should just kind of step away. But the problem is the last 2 years have been such a blight on his history book that I think people will not look that fondly upon his time and go, oh, well, he just was dominant in a dominant car. Which would be a shame, because I do think he is an amazing driver. But yeah, God, it's just proving tough. And so I mentioned Hulkenberg potentially being in a Ferrari by the end of the year, or at some point this year. Because we've got to ask, is Vettel going to see the year out? Are Ferrari going to want him to see the year out? Are they going to try and give him the boot early? Because I wouldn't be surprised. Ferrari have been known for being brutal in the past. And if he's off and he's going, at this rate, why is he? What's the motivation for him to keep turning up? He just seems unhappy. The car seems appalling for him to drive. Keeps making mistakes. I would kind of just bow out, especially if he does line up the Aston Martin drive for next year. I think if he's retiring, well, I guess even more motivation to just piss off. So at that point, I think Hulkenberg would be a great shoe-in to Ferrari. There are obviously plenty of other drivers that they could look to. But I think Vettel will see the year through. I would be surprised if he bowed out. I think he has a little bit more integrity than that, but it could happen. At the moment, his year is just one I'm sure he's going to want to forget. So yeah, at the moment, in 11th position in the championship, no positivity on the horizon for poor Seb Vettel. Just ahead of him, Daniel Ricciardo, who I do think is having a much stronger year at Renault. Is he going to start thinking, oh, should I be leaving? Should I be going to McLaren? Because Renault is starting to look a bit punchy now. Obviously had that amazing 4th place again, one of the Silverstone races. It's been looking kind of quickish in quali. But Renault, I mean, the midfield is so competitive that every race track, the order kind of changes around a bit. And some teams are super competitive here, and then the next weekend they're not, and whatever it might be. So Renault are hit and miss, but they are looking good. And Danny's looking a little bit more confident in the car, more confident on the brakes, seeing some old school moves from him, less mistakes, I suppose. So yeah, exciting to see that, because I think we all want Danny Ric back at the front winning races. I really hope he's made the right move moving to McLaren next year, because it feels like maybe the Renault move was not the most ideal move in his career. And if McLaren doesn't turn out to be super competitive and fighting for podiums pretty quickly, I think he's going to get overtaken by a lot of the upcoming young up-and-comers. Because weirdly, he's one of the older men on the grid, Danny Ric. He's not the young shiner that he used to be. So, proven talent, but he's McLaren's probably his last bet. I don't think he's going to get a Mercedes or a Red Bull or Ferrari drive after that. So I'm keeping all my fingers crossed for him. Could he sneak a podium this year? Maybe, but it would need a lot of other retirements, wouldn't it? Another sip of my drink, please. 2 seconds. It's quite tough doing podcasts by yourself. It's essentially a monologue for a long time. And as I say, I get why a lot of you appreciate having Tony here as well. But he likes his F1 Tony, but this would be too nerdy for him. He'd get bored and he'd abuse me, and I wouldn't get across all the stuff that I wanted to talk about. So it's beneficial for me, but as I say, it's also tiring and quite tough to keep talking. Anyway, we're going to get on. Carlos Sainz Jr., P9. Now, a lot of noise was made about Carlos end of last year, managing that amazing 6th place in the Drivers' Championship. Super strong second half of the year, and as we know, Ferrari signed him up for 2021 to partner Leclerc, and everyone was like, wow, Carlos Sainz. Now, interestingly, when I was doing some of the stuff with Nico Rosberg during lockdown, some of the Heineken activations, and we had a few chats, I spoke to him off camera about Sainz, and Rosberg was a little bit like, I'm not like, I think he's a solid second driver. And I was like, oh, no way, mate. Like, this was before any racing had happened. I was like, oh, he had such a good year, end of the year. And every time I went to a Formula One paddock, people were going nuts for Carlos Sainz. And Nico was like, I'm not certain. And I'm kind of seeing that a bit this year. He's not having the most... he's having a quiet year, which is kind of how he started 2019. And then he obviously had that super strong end of the year. Lando Norris is the one making all the noise for McLaren right now, I think, pulling out some incredible moves and races, but also results from quali to the race. We're seeing a lot of him. He's doing exciting stuff, while Carlos, not so much. And in terms of results, we've got a 5th, 9th, 13th, 6th. So he's basically been out of the points twice, while Lando's only been out of the points once. And obviously had that podium as well, which, okay, fine, Carlos kind of had in a similar way last year at Brazil, both of them kind of getting awarded the podium after a time penalty. But Lando's felt a little bit more justified, I think. No, that's a bit harsh, but felt like he really went out there and raced it and deserved it. So Carlos, I kind of want to see a bit more from, because I just feel like he's having that quiet year. And at this point, you would think that Leclerc is just going to absolutely walk all over him at Ferrari. Hope that's not the case, because I think he's exciting and I think he is a baby Alonso, but disappointed at the moment by his year this year. Sergio Perez, Checo Perez, P8 in the championship right now, 32 points. Now, this is kind of my thing here. I feel like Racing Point haven't really achieved their potential. There's been a lot of talk about the fact that they're basically running the 2019 Mercedes. And it's a bit controversial, and obviously there have been some issues with this, and they've lost some championship points and received fines, and I think this is going to continue going on throughout the year, a lot of complaints and things. But if they really are running that car, why are they not always on the podium, or why are they not doing better? I think in qualifying trim, they're looking quickish, or at least in practice ahead of the actual race weekend, they are looking quick, and then it all seems to fade away, and the race results haven't quite been there. And Perez, I would argue, is kind of being, well, I think Stroll is having a stronger year. We've got to talk about Stroll because he's above Perez in the championship. But yeah, Sergio, obviously unlucky to have those 2 races out. And maybe if he didn't have those, we would have seen some stronger results, especially based on what Hulkenberg could do at Silverstone. But yeah, I think definitely some podiums ahead for Perez. And I think he is still an amazing talent that has matured and become so strong over his years at Force India and etc. Basically post his kind of McLaren era, or McLaren year? McLaren era? Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, solid from Perez. Go on. P7, Lando Norris. As I mentioned, what a year he's having. Everyone loved to talk him down last year. Oh, he's the gamer. He's always streaming. He's always on his phone. He's not a real racing driver. Well, he's proven you all wrong. And I think he probably... I don't think he's applied himself, but I think he's taken a step to make it look like he's working as hard as he has been working. I think he's always worked the same level. I think a rookie year, he still had a good rookie year last year, but I think he learned a lot. And I think one thing that he probably learned was that if it looks like you're always on your phone and messing around and making funny memes, people will always use that as your first reason as to why you failed. It was a bit like Lewis, when he used to go partying or whatever. If there was ever a picture of him in a nightclub the Thursday before a Grand Prix, people were like, oh yeah, well, he was out partying, he wasn't paying attention. And I think Lando sort of saw that, and so whilst behind the scenes he was working as hard as ever, he just decided to kind of cut some of the social media back. And results are just amazing, and I'm glad that people are taking him seriously, and yeah, brilliant. Go on, Lando Norris. What a shining light for the future of McLaren and Formula One. Just above him, Alex Albon. Now, what are we thinking about old Albon? I think he's had a very tough season so far. However, his race results have been spectacular, in comparison to his qualifying and his actual races. Of course, P13 in Austria had that awful moment when he could have potentially won the race, at least would have, at the very minimum, been on the podium, trying to overtake Lewis Hamilton. There was contact. Lewis obviously got the penalty. And Albon ended up 13th. Then we get a 4th, a 5th, an 8th, a 5th, and 8th. Obviously, when we look at Max Verstappen, it's not good enough. Albon needs to be closer. But when you consider his starting positions, because he's often messed up his quali or he's had a penalty or whatever, and he's not always in Q3, he's always moving forward. He always has very good race pace. And I am still excited by Albon. I think he needs to put it all together. Let's not forget, drivers need to go through that learning process. Even Verstappen had a disastrous time, years 2 and 3. He was arrogant, making mistakes. People were saying, oh, he's got ahead of himself. He needs to iron out all these issues. I really hope Red Bull don't make any rash decisions, because I think Albon is great and in really exciting races. Some of his overtakes, just nuts. Some of the moves he's pulling on people like Kimi Raikkonen, just like, who does that? Albon does. What a hero. So yeah, I really hope he's there to stick around for a bit longer. I think the results are good. They just need to be a touch stronger. And I think if he can qualify better or more consistently, I think that will help him out a lot. Because at the moment, he's starting on the back foot and having to work his way up towards Verstappen. And therefore, he's always a few positions away and not able to get involved in the sort of strategy and stuff. So yeah, anyway, I'm a fan. I'm an Albon fan. In P4, we have to talk about, I think the man who's having the season of his life, Charles Leclerc. And you might think, oh, Sam, what are you talking about? Ferrari are just disaster this year. And that is true. So how on earth is Leclerc in P4 in the championship? The man has had a 2nd place, a retirement, an 11th, a 3rd, a 4th, and a retirement. I mean, that Ferrari, as far as we're aware, is a dog. Ferrari have really got it wrong. And it pains me to see, even though I am a Hamilton fan, it pains me to see I'm a Ferrari guy. And I really like Leclerc. And it's horrible to see them go backwards and for them to kind of admit that they're a few years away from being championship contenders again. But no, they're not, because there's Charles Leclerc just knocking on the door, just banging out these amazing results. He's just always there, ready to take advantage of the situations. And I think he's amazing. I think he's got to be, so far, for me, one of the most impressive drivers this year. Him and Norris are blowing me away this year. So yeah, great to see. I would love him to steal a victory at one of the Italian races, because Ferrari are just being written off. I'd love everything to go wrong for Mercedes and Leclerc just to be there and just to steal a victory, because he deserves it. Third in the championship, Valtteri Bottas. He's won the first race of the year. He's going to be champion. He's so good. It's Bottas. This is Bottas 3.5. Oh. Now, I don't want to be harsh here, because he's obviously a bloody good driver. He's obviously incredible. He's obviously very talented. But boy, does his driving style bore me. That is critical and harsh. And I'm literally a pundit. I'm a fan. I'm not even a pundit. I'm a fan. And I'm a Hamilton fan, so I'm biased. But Rosberg, I think we all have to look back at Rosberg and go, as much as we all slagged him off at certain points, boy, he was clearly so good. He's really the only guy that's properly challenged Hamilton in the last, dare I say it, 10 years. Because even Button had his moments, but Lewis still kind of kept the upper hand. Rosberg was always there or thereabouts. Bottas, unfortunately, did I say Bottas? I meant Button. I said Button? Anyway, Bottas, unfortunately, just so unconvincing when it comes up to sort of fighting Lewis. I think if he gets the right qualifying result, and arguably he can be as quick, if not quicker than Lewis over a single lap, I will definitely hand that to him. He's a quick guy. But over a race, if they're ever on the same piece of tarmac, you kind of just assume Lewis is going to manage to get past him or hold him off. Never feels that threatening. And the fact that Mercedes are so dominant this year, Max Verstappen has overtaken him in the championship. Okay, fine. Bottas had that unlucky puncture in Silverstone. But Verstappen also had a retirement in Austria. So kind of on a level playing field there. But yeah, he's been re-signed for next year because he's solid, isn't he? He's a solid bet for Mercedes. He doesn't really do too much wrong. He's consistent. He's there. If Lewis is off form, if Lewis has an issue, Bottas is right there, which is what Mercedes need. But you just don't see him ever winning a championship whilst Lewis is still in the team. Do you? I don't think so. So I still struggle to really get on the Bottas bandwagon, but there he is in P3 and he'll win some races and, P2, Max Verstappen. I mean, this guy. Saw an interesting article the other day. Someone saying that Verstappen at Red Bull's a bit like Senna at Lotus. He's just in the wings waiting for that championship winning car, at which point he will be unstoppable. But I will flip it around and say, could he be a Montoya? What if Verstappen never wins a championship? Could you imagine that? I mean, it could happen. It could happen. If Mercedes continue to dominate like this, Hamilton said he wants to keep racing for another 3 years, at which point is Leclerc going to be starting to come back with Ferrari and Norris and Ricciardo and people like that? Like, what if Verstappen never wins a championship? He'll be the Sterling Moss of our generation. But I think he'll have to at some point, won't he? To be pulling out the results he does in a car that you could argue is half a second a lap slower than a Mercedes is damn impressive. And his mentality is getting really good, and he's so consistent these days. He's getting a bit of that Hamilton consistency whilst also being racy and aggressive. So where would he go if he left Red Bull? Where would you see Verstappen? I don't see him at Ferrari. Maybe I see him at Mercedes. He just seems so suited to Red Bull and their ethos and the way they go racing. And what I like about Red Bull is they haven't turned out to be a flash-in-the-pan manufacturer. They're still there, aren't they, fighting for wins? Maybe not fighting for championships that closely, but they're still there. So let's see. I can't believe that he would never win a championship. But there is one man who just keeps stopping him, and it is Lewis Hamilton. Because yes, it seems scary to say that Hamilton is just getting better, isn't he? Day by day, season by season, he just keeps getting better. He just looks unbeatable. And you know what? As a Hamilton fan, I actually don't enjoy watching him as much as I used to. Because, you know what? Sorry, I just had a bit of a panic attack there. The rain is really heavy on the roof. I thought someone was trying to break into the studio. So that really scared me. I've got my headphones on so I can keep an ear on all the sort of levels of the recordings and stuff. And it sounded like someone was breaking in. I had a complete panic attack. Oh, sorry. Let's calm down. Let's go back to Lewis Hamilton. Yeah, just getting better and better. But as a fan, he's no longer this super exhilarating. He's not. He used to be Max Verstappen. He used to be racing through the field, carving, making mad overtakes, coming through from 10th place, getting wins that you never expected him to get. But now he's just there, isn't he? Just getting pole and winning from the front. You never have to see him dig deep anymore. And that's the Lewis that I was a fan of. I'm not such a fan of, I'm complaining about my tyres, but I'm actually still 20 seconds in the lead. It's just not that exciting. But I have to stay true to the fact that, I was a fan and I am a fan, and on his day, he's still exciting to watch, but he just doesn't get the opportunity that more to be that exciting. I would like to see him in a Ferrari, just to kind of see him battling away like Leclerc is. Like, it'd just be more exciting, I think. But yeah, he's been mighty, mighty impressive, and he's well on his track, I think, to equal Schumacher. Do we think, now that he's announced that he wants to stick around for another 3 years, he's going for 10 world championships? Kind of get that feeling. I really do. But God, that would be depressing. So let's wait and see. But yeah, he's having a mighty, mighty year, and I don't see him putting a foot wrong. But lots still to come. As I say, at time of recording, we just had the Spanish Grand Prix. We've got Spa coming up, the various Italian Grand Prix, going back to Imola. Oh, so exciting. I have to say, though, I don't expect Imola to be a good race. And actually, some of these tracks that we're going back to, Formula One cars, I just don't think they're right. Like, Imola was always tough to overtake back in 2005, 2006. Now, let's not forget those epic races with Schumacher and Alonso. They couldn't get past each other. And now Formula One cars are 4 times the size that they were back then. So I do think that's going to be a bit of a procession, but it will look great. And, Turkey, all these things that are being rumoured. Turkey's still not confirmed, but let's keep our fingers crossed. So I'm hopeful. And I will, of course, keep watching. But in general, I would say Austria was very exciting, the first race of the year. The Styrian Grand Prix, dead. Hungary is okay-ish, wasn't it? Wasn't amazing. I think we all had higher hopes. The British Grand Prix, awful race until the last 3 laps when they all started having tyre failures. The 70th anniversary Grand Prix, amazing. Great race because of Verstappen, really. And then Spain, deadly dull. So let's see what happens moving forward. But those are kind of my thoughts. Let me know below. What are your feelings about F1 2020? Are you enjoying watching it? Are you a bit fed up? Is it a bit weird? Are you a bit bored of Hamilton winning everything? I think lots of you will say yes, but it's impressive to see. And yeah, just let me know your general thoughts. I hope you have enjoyed this. It's a bit of a rambling from me, as I mentioned. Apologies for the random interruptions, drinking, scared by rain. And apologies, I say, Tony wasn't here for those of you that are fans of Tony, but don't worry, he will be back for another episode coming very soon, or coming next week. Won't be an F1 special, but we can touch on some topics if you want to, because we haven't even mentioned things like Alonso returning, which I do actually kind of want to talk about with Tony, or someone honking their horn outside. But yes, if you're watching here on YouTube, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on notifications for future episodes. If you're listening, continue listening on whatever audio platform you're listening to us on. And patrons, thank you so much for continuing to support this podcast. If you are interested in becoming a patron, head over to patreon.com/behindtheglass. You can find out ways that you can support us and the various rewards for doing so. And yeah, I'll catch up with you all very, very soon. Bye-bye.